Hi, this is the old professor, and I just finished a motorcycle ride, but I'm not going to talk about motorcycle riding today. I'm going to talk about something different. As many of you know, I used to teach freshman students, engineering students, and one of the things that I would notice when I would do it, but I used to notice when some of the students came to class, they had what they called test-taking anxiety. And what this means is they knew the material, but when it came time to take the test or to perform, they got nervous, tightened up, tensed up, and couldn't execute the exams properly. And so, me having spent 30 some odd years in industry, knowing that performing under pressure, which is what this is something that you're going to have to do throughout life, no matter what you're going to be doing. And I know that I was always, as an engineer, I was always under cost pressure, schedule pressure, pressure to have the equipment work properly, pressure to get to market before your competitor did, things like that. So anyway, when these students would come to class with this issue, I decided I would want to try to pull something together to try to see if I could help them with it. Now, as a little bit of a disclaimer, I'm not a therapist, although my wife is, and this is her office. But anything that I'm going to say, you can find if you Google power of positive thinking or things like that, so that there's nothing that I'm going to say that's unique or something that I thought up, something that you can find anywhere you look. Okay. So what I thought I would try to find is some way to help these students perform better under pressure. Now, the whole premise behind this whole, what I'm going to talk about today is this concept that perceived success is what drives the real performance. Okay? And what that means is this. If you think you can do it, you probably do it very well. If you think you can't do it, you probably do it poorly. Okay? And that's very simple. And if you don't think that's true, I want you to consider this little example. If I were to take a strip of this electrical tape, put it on the floor, stretch it out from one wall to the other, and then we'll go over 3 feet from that, put another strip of tape on the floor, so that I end up having 2 strips of tape 3 feet apart from one wall to the other. And I were to ask you to say, okay, go ahead and walk from this side of the room to the other side of the room, staying within those 2 lines. I'm pretty sure everybody could do that. Right? But if I were to take a 3-foot wide steel I-beam, and I were to stretch it between the 100th floor, say, of 2 skyscrapers that were maybe 100 feet apart, and then I say, now walk across this 3-foot I-beam from one building to the other, and you might have trouble doing that. I know I would, because I'd be looking down on each side of that I-beam saying, now what would happen if I fall, and how big a splat I would make, and things like that. And as such, I would have a difficulty going across that beam. Now, I didn't forget how to walk. The only difference is that my perception of what can go wrong was driving and keeping me from performing the way I should. Now, if I were a wire walker, like somebody like Nick Belinda, I saw on TV Nick walk tightrope across Niagara Falls. He wouldn't have any trouble doing it because he has a much broader comfort zone than I do. Okay, let's talk about this term comfort zone a bit. If we consider this, where I've got a continuum of self-perception, a continuum, and this area in here, which I'm going to call my comfort zone. The higher up on this continuum I have the comfort zone, the more comfortable I am. Down here, I'm not very comfortable at all. So if I were to take this example, on the floor walking between the lines, I'm at my comfort zone is up here. But if I'm up on top of that I-beam, a few thousand feet in the air, or a few hundred feet in the air, for example, I'm down here. So this is not very comfortable for me. So what I want to do is to come up with some sort of criteria or some devices or something I can do that will raise my comfort zone to a level where it'll help me perform better. Okay? So that's what we want to do, is be able to raise our comfort zone. Okay? Well, let's talk about how we can do that. Let's say, for example, that we were born with an empty bucket. And this empty bucket was our self-esteem or our self-worth. And in it, this represents the bucket. Every time I got some praise or some compliments, I put a plus coin in the bucket. Okay? And this, by the way, when I did that, it would elevate me a little bit farther in the comfort zone continuum because it would make me feel better about myself. Every time someone criticized me or something negative happened, I would have to throw a negative coin in the bucket, which would then move me down the continuum further and a little bit more negative. Okay? So this would perform poorly if I've got more negative, again, and more positively perform better if I go right near the top. Okay? So let's say I got this bucket. Now, I carry this around with me all through my life, and I've got my, where I am right now, I've got my bucket with me, so I've got some level of self-esteem. So I'm somewhere in this continuum. I don't know where I am yet, but that's where I am. But I know that if I can find some way to raise it, I can perform better. Okay? Now, I don't have control over what's in this bucket. But the one thing I do have control over is what I, myself, put in that bucket. If I put plus things in the bucket, I'll improve my performance. If I put minus things in the bucket, I will decrease my performance. Okay? That's the only thing I got control over as far as the bucket is concerned, is what I put in it. Okay? So this little technique is called the SelfTalk Cycle. And you can look this up on Google, and there's a whole bunch of information on this. Now the SelfTalk Cycle says this. I'm going to tell myself how I'm doing. And I'm going to do this by putting plus coins in the bucket or minus things in the bucket. Either one of these is going to drive how I'm going to perform from that point on. Okay? And then I'm going to come again, and I'm going to talk about how I did that again, how I performed again, and continue along. So this is called the SelfTalk Cycle. This is under our control. Doesn't mean that somebody has to tell us how to do this or anything like else. It's under our control. Okay? So what we're going to do is look at ways that we can do this, control that with our self-talk. If you were, for example, come home from school or come home from work and someone were to ask you, how was your day? And you say, oh, I was driving to work and somebody cut me off and I didn't get a raise today. My equipment didn't run. Uh, I got an earache or something like this. These are all negative things, which we have, if we looked at comparing to what we were talking about before, will drive us down on the self-esteem continuum and make us perform poorly. Or if we really be honest with ourselves and look at what really happened that day, probably most of the things that happened were positive. You got up, you were able to breathe, your heart was beating, you were able to get up and go to work or go to school or whatever. You didn't get hit by a bus. A train didn't run over you. Things like that. A lot of great things happen. So if you focus on those rather than the negative ones, you're putting positive things in your bucket and you're feeling better about what you're doing that day. And that's raising your comfort zone. Another thing to do is that just before you're about to take an exam or make a speech or do something that's anxiety provoking, close your eyes and imagine yourself in a very positive place, very comfortable place for you. It may be at the beach or doing a horseback ride or whatever it is for you. For me, that is riding my motorcycle down a nice, quiet country road. That's my place for comfort. And that's one of the reasons I have this channel, is that so that I can pull up these things and get positive vibes from them in the wintertime when I can't get out and ride. Okay? So what we can do in the future then is to try to keep positive, because we know that positive things, be our own cheerleader, you know. We can't control what somebody else says about us or what somebody else is going to do to us or whatever, but we can control what we put in that bucket. And if we choose to put positive things in that bucket, we will raise our level of comfort. And that means that we'll perform better no matter what we're doing. Now, this doesn't mean that this is going to be a substitute for preparation or study or anything like that. You still have to do the work. But what it will do, it'll make it so that you will minimize the amount of silly mistakes you make. And so what I want you to do now is to keep this in mind. Keep imagining that I-beam example, because that gets everybody's attention, and you can't say that it doesn't affect you. I mean, you think about that I-beam example. So try to be positive as much as you can. Every time you get into a tense, stressful situation, think something positive. Be your own cheerleader. And just keep trying to do it. You don't have to be perfect at it, but just anything that you can do to help will elevate that level of comfort and improve your comfort zone. Okay? So that's all I wanted to say. And now I'm going to close this with this is a saying that I had outside of my office door when I was teaching. It said, success does not come from what you know. It comes from what you do with what you know. So whatever your level of training or expertise it is, it isn't worth anything until you go out and do something with it. And what you do with it, if you keep it positive, it'll always get better. Okay? So have a good day and ride safe.